The Lateran Palace, formerly the Apostolic Palace of the Lateran, is an ancient palace of the Roman Empire and later the main papal residence in southeast Rome, located on St. John's Square in Lateran on the Caelian Hill. It is adjacent to the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, the Cathedral Church of Rome. From the 4th century, the palace was the principal residence of the popes, and continued so for about 1,000 years until the seat ultimately moved to the Vatican. The palace is now used by the Vatican Historical Museum, which illustrates the history of the Papal States. The palace also houses the offices of the Vicariate of Rome, as well as the residential apartments of the Cardinal Vicar, the Pope's delegate for the daily administration of the diocese. Until 1970, the palace was also home to the important collections of the Lateran Museum, now dispersed among other parts of the Vatican museums. Following the Lateran Treaty of 1929, the palace and adjoining basilica are extraterritorial properties of the Holy See. History. Pre Papal Use. The site on which the Basilica di San Giovanni in Lateran sits was occupied during the early Roman Empire by the Domus of the Plausci Laterani family. The Laterani served as administrators for several emperors. Their ancestor Lucius Sextius Latinus is said to have been the first plebeian to attain the rank of consul. In 366 BC, one of the Laterani, consul designate Plautius Lateranus, became famous for being accused by Nero of conspiracy against the emperor. The accusation resulted in the confiscation and redistribution of his properties. Constantinian Era. The Domus Latinani fell into the hands of the emperor when Constantine I married his second wife Fausta, sister of Maxentius, known by that time as the Domus Faustae or House of Fausta. Around 312, Constantine had the adjoining imperial horse guards barracks razed. The equites singulares had allegedly supported Maxentius against Constantine. He commissioned the construction of the Basilica di San Giovanni in Laterano. The site, the Domus, was eventually given to the Bishop of Rome by Constantine. The actual date of the gift is unknown, but scholars believe it had to have been during the pontificate of Pope Miltiades, in time to host a synod of bishops in 313 that was convened to challenge the Donatists. Subsequent renovations as Byzantium grew less able to help prevent Lombard incursions, the papacy became more independent of the empire. Author Eric Thuno notes that the incentive to refurbish the Lateran Palace was to create an imperial residence from which the Pope could exercise not only spiritual but temporal authority. The Pope's palace at the Lateran in Rome was extensively added to in the late 8th century by Pope Hadrian I and Pope Leo III. Leo III built an enormous triclinium. It was one of the most famous halls of the ancient palace and was the state banqueting hall, lined with mosaics. Nothing remains of this, but in 1743 copies of the mosaics were made from drawings and placed in a specially built structure opposite the palace. The existing structure is not ancient, but a representation of the original mosaics is preserved in a three-part mosaic. In the center, Christ gives their mission to the apostles. On the left, he gives the keys to Saint Sylvester and the labyrinth to Constantine, while on the right, Peter gives the stole to Leo III and the standard to Charlemagne, an image meant to represent the Frankish king's duty to protect the church. The triclinium and the Sala del Concilio, an oblong hall with apse mosaic and 5 ornate niches on each side, were built around 800 to serve as the heart of papal ceremonial. Architecturally they were reminiscent of Byzantine imperial buildings in Constantinople. In the 10th century Sergius III restored it after a disastrous fire, and later it was greatly embellished by Innocent III. This was the period of its greatest magnificence, when Dante speaks of it as beyond all human achievements. At this time the center of the piazza was occupied by the palace and tower of the Anibaldi family. Between this palace and the Lateran Basilica was the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius, which at the time was erroneously believed to represent the Christian Emperor Constantine. A copy of the equestrian statue is now placed in the center of the Capitoline Square, while the original has been safely preserved for display in the Capitoline museums. In its place, the Lateran obelisk was erected. Originally commissioned by Pharaoh Thutmosis III, it was completed by his grandson, Thutmosis IV. At 32.18 meters, it is the tallest obelisk in Rome and the largest standing ancient Egyptian obelisk in the world, weighing over 230 tons. Following the annexation of Egypt to the empire, it was taken from the Temple of Ammon in Karnak and brought to Alexandria with another obelisk by Constantius II. From there it was brought on its own to Rome in 357 to decorate the spina of the Circus Maximus. The dedication on the base, however, gives the glory to Constantine I, not to his son who brought it to Rome. The whole of the front of the palace was taken up with the Aula Concilii, a magnificent hall with 11 apses, in which were held the various councils of the Lateran during the medieval period. The private apartments of the popes in this palace were situated between this triclinium and the city walls. Avignon Papacy. The fall of the palace from this position of glory was the result of the departure of the popes from Rome during the Avignon Papacy. Two destructive fires, in 1307 and 1361, did irreparable harm, and although vast sums were sent from Avignon for the rebuilding, the palace never again attained its former splendor. The palace had Gothic architectural elements at this point. When the popes returned to Rome, they resided first at Basilica di Santa Maria in Trastevere, then at Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore, and lastly fixed their residence at the Vatican. St. Peter's Basilica, also built by Constantine, had until then served primarily as a pilgrimage church. Sixtus V, more concerned with rationalized urban planning than the preservation of antiquities, then destroyed what still remained of the ancient palace of the Lateran in 1586 and erected the present much smaller edifice in its place. Designed by his favorite architect Domenico Fontana. 16th century alterations. The architect he employed, immediately upon his election, was Domenico Fontana, who was engaged in alterations to the basilica at the same time. Fontana's strong, restrained style, influenced by Giacomo Vignola and modelled upon Palazzo Farnese for its regular and harmonious if somewhat bland major facade, and Fontana's sound engineering basis and power of coordinating a complicated architectural program on a tightly constrained site, which Sixtus urged forward at top speed, are remarkable. A notice on 29 August 1589 announced that the work had been completed. A great palace in Piazza Lateranese has been brought to completion by Sixtus V. Fontana reapplied motifs of the Lateran Palace in the part of the Vatican Palace containing the present papal apartments, which he undertook later, and in his additions to the Quirinal Palace. The east front was finished under Clement XII, who surmounted it with his coat of arms in 1735. From the old Lateran constructions 3 monuments survive, 2 of which were located in one building built by Domenico Fontana in 1589 opposite the Lateran Basilica. These monuments are the Scala Santa and the Chapel of the Sancta Sanctorum. Modern use. Its site was considered unhealthy in Rome's malarial summers, however. In the late 17th century, Innocent XII located, in a part of it, a hospice for orphans who were set to work in a little silk manufactory. In the 19th century, Gregory XVI and Pius IX founded at the Lateran a museum of religious art and pagan culture for overflow from the Vatican galleries. In 1925 Pius XI established an ethnographic museum devoted to artifacts sent back by missionaries. On the 11th of February 1929, the Lateran Treaty was signed here, at last regulating the relations between the Holy See and the Italian state. It established that both the Basilica and the Lateran Palace were extraterritorial properties of the Holy See, enjoying privileges similar to foreign embassies on Italian soil. Seat of the Vicariate of Rome. Pope John XXIII returned to the palace some pastoral functions by fixing here the seat of the Vicariate and offices of the Diocese of Rome. The same pope removed the collections of the Lateran Museum to the Vatican. The Lateran Palace is now also occupied by the Museo Storico Vaticano, which illustrates the history of the Papal States. It was moved to the palace in 1987 and opened to the public in 1991. On the 27th of July 1992, a bomb explosion devastated the facade of the Rome Vicariate at St. John Lateran. The attack is widely assumed to have been the work of the Italian Mafia, a warning against Pope John Paul II's frequent anti-mafia statements. Repairs were completed in January 1996. As for the present pastoral functions of the palace, it today houses the offices of the Vicariate of Rome, as well as the living quarters of the Cardinal Vicar General of His Holiness for the Diocese of Rome. Tourists can visit the papal apartments usually in the morning.